Hi, Krishna. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you might be in the world. I'm delighted today to be joined by Gandharvika and Kamalesh Krishna Prabhus, who since 2016 were running ISKCON's International Child Protection Office. I think that's the longest serving tenure of CPO officers. And, you know, maybe there's no one in a better position to tell us how ISKCON's maturity is going in terms of its attitudes towards child protection. So happy that you're able to join us. And I might just start by saying thank you. Thank you deeply on behalf of the whole Vaishnav community for taking that responsible service on. And we've all been marveling at your resilience, your grit, your courage, and your compassion in doing that all these years. Maybe I'll pass to you both and you can introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit more about the whole person. And we'd love to also know what really brought you to this work of child protection.
I'll defer to Gandharvika to start off with ladies first.
Oh dear. I'm Gandharvika Dasi. I've been around for about 41 years, as Damodar just reminded me. I didn't really get into child protection until I think a year after the office was opened in 1998. So I, by default, was sent on the course in Italy with the training by Dira Govinda Prabhu, because somebody dropped out. And yeah, I didn't really understand what I was doing or what it really was. So it was by default. I'd heard some whisperings and rumors about abuse that had taken place in the 80s. And I was just thinking, really? I'm not sure about that. Did that really happen? I was very naive, you know, thinking all devotees are pure devotees. And, you know, and over the years, I heard more and more things. So when this opportunity came up in 1999, I thought, well, maybe I'll just kind of look into this and see what we're doing about it, you know. We flew to Italy with a few devotees, Jester, Moksha Lakshmi, Sri Karma, Pragosh Prabhu was there. And it was a fantastic training course in Italy. Absolutely brilliant. Dira Govinda did like really comprehensive training for the week. It was fascinating. As soon as the training started, I realized I was kind of hooked into this. You know, I really enjoyed what there was, the training was. I was really glad that ISKCON was doing something to address this issue. And yeah, I think the shock at the end of that training was we actually did some live cases. And I think myself and Pragosh and one other devotee, I can't remember. I remember we read the case together and we just felt very, very shocked at what we were reading. And yeah, that's how it started for me. And when I came back, I kind of just became the child protection officer for the manor and then eventually the whole of the UK. Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you. And I might just ask you one quick question on what you just said before Kamalesh introduces. So obviously you're exposed on a regular basis to what might be quite harrowing information about what's happened to a child. What allows you to, I guess, not to sort of succumb to darkness and despair when you see some of these ugly sides of human nature?
Well, it is difficult. I would say it's difficult. And I have, on occasions, had counselling about it because I think that's important to be able to tell another person what you've taken into your head, you know, what you've seen other people experience, other devotees experience. So I think that's important. But I think the fact that you can do something about it, it eases that, you know, what you've seen, it definitely eases it. Like if I was reading it and I couldn't do anything about it, I think that would be really different. But you sort of learn to compartmentalize these things, because there's an end goal to it. So I think that's how I've coped with it. Although some things I've some cases I've picked up, I actually haven't been able to read through. It's taken me days, sometimes weeks, to go back to it because it's been so harrowing. I couldn't, I've had to kind of let myself in slowly to some of the cases. I think that's true of anyone, really. Social workers, I think they all have the same problem,
Kamalesh, tell us about yourself.
There's not a great deal. Again, bodily, I'm getting very old, and it's a similar time that we all joined. Been hanging around, as someone would say, for over 41 years now within ISKCON in one way or another. Now, as far as child protection is concerned, being with my wife and watching her carry out the function of a child protection officer in the UK, etc., and also carrying out quite extensive services, if you like, on behalf of the international office at that time, and being stretched, I tried to help out. And first of all, it was just trying to help out through a bit of admin, and then moving on and getting further training and moving on to be a judge or panelist, as we call them now, etc. So that's how I was eased into it many years ago, or brought into it. And then, when the last, or the current even now, international director had, let's say, come to the end of her term, Gandharvika was asked if she would take over as the international director. And Gandharvika felt at that time that, no, I'm quite happy carrying out the functionality and aiding in that functionality of the office, but to have to interact with certain levels, let's say, of management, etc., she didn't feel that comfortable on it. So it was then proposed that I take on the directorship and work as a team with Gandharvika at the international office. So that was 9 years ago now, so quite a while ago. So that's how I was brought into child protection.
My husband is more diplomatic than I am, so it was a much better idea.
You're a magistrate by background?
I serve as a magistrate primarily in the family courts, but I can also sit in criminal courts, i.e. adult courts. And I've recently just been, if you like, elevated, as they call it, to be a presiding justice.
Congratulations. That must be quite rewarding after years of that professional kind of work to get that recognition.
Yeah, no, I was quite happy. I kind of came into the magistracy because of this service that we carried out in ISKCON. And we'll go into a little bit more. I don't want to blow my own trumpet because of the masters that we carried out. And it was encouraged at that time that, we take on other services outside which were needed. So that's where it came. And, I've been a magistrate now, 4 or 5 years. So relatively short tenure, but I'm being told fairly fast.
And you mentioned that you had attended that Dhira Govinda session in Italy, Gandharvika, which sort of tuned you into what the work would mean. Was there any sense that it would be the biggest challenge might be working with ISKCON's leaders to get them to take child protection seriously and commit and support their child protection team? Was that ever imaginable? Was that something Dhira Govinda prepared you for?
No. I was really naive, and I thought that just because we were there and because of the training was so good, it was so extensive, and I just assumed, I think I just made that assumption that the GBC must be really behind this because they're funding it. We had to fly to get the training. We had to travel, and I just sort of assumed, wow, ISKCON's really taking this to heart. And I actually felt like that for quite a few years afterwards. I remember talking to other, because other people in other religions started contacting me at the manor, saying, you know, we heard you've got this, you know, child protection policy. They were visiting at the weekend, saw policies on the board and thought, oh, these people kind of know what they're doing. They have a child protection policy on the board. They have the photograph of the child protection officer, the contact number. This is very advanced. That's what it seemed like. So for years and years, I felt very proud of what we were doing. And we were totally ahead of the game at the time in ISKCON. You know, no one else was doing that in other religions that I could see. And others were phoning us for advice, how to set up their own policies. I sent them our policies so they could adapt them. And so I felt very enthusiastic that we were going in a really good direction.
You know, to give you some sort of idea or context, we were even contacted by one of the biggest mosques in the UK to come and give a talk, to come and help them understand child protection, which we did. And that kind of speaks volumes when other religious organizations recognize the worth of our child protection policies, our child protection ethos, if you like, and procedures, that actually approach you and say, please help in an open way.
Was it a shock to find that the support you might have presumed was natural from any decent person was not always forthcoming from ISKCON's leaders, that funding dried up, that sometimes they would openly criticize you publicly or interfere in cases or ignore restrictions or canvass for their buddies? I mean, how did you deal with that as it played out for you over the years?
It was really difficult. It was really difficult because you know, people, you know, they often seem like they're accepting the way the case has gone, and then there's a little bit of comeback, and it's just like in incremental parts, you know. Oh, can we slightly change this? Do you think we think this is a little bit unfair? Can you slightly change that? Can you? And before you know it, they want you to change the whole outcome of the case, you know. And it just happens very gradually, and it's quite shocking because in the background we've done so many cases that nobody knows about. The GBC are not aware of it. They're not aware of who these people are. Usually, it tends to be when it's somebody that's more high profile, somebody they know.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I don't think any devotee would actively want to support child abuse.
Yeah.
It comes down to various things. One, knowledge, experience, awareness, and awareness of personal bias that may be there. Unconscious bias, where they're biased towards a certain person that they've known for many years. And they have their own opinions as to that. And also what they've been exposed to or what they've been told about a particular case by various parties. And very seldom will the victims come forward and express their feelings, their thoughts, because victims don't want to be publicized. They don't want to be in that spotlight again because they have to relive that again. So why have public scrutiny? They tend to kind of melt into the background and they don't want to have this glare, which unfortunately the accused at times kind of solicit and through lobbying, through speaking to various senior, if you like, or influential devotees on their behalf. And this is where it comes in. And also we have to appreciate that when you have a body that's in charge of an organization and they're making the key crucial decisions on the organization, a body of, let's say, just over 30. And they're used to making that, and they're used to having their resolutions adhered to and passed and not challenged, as it were. When you get a body like the Child Protection Office who are looking at this insidious thing of child protection or child abuse, and they have very little control apart from hiring and firing the director and having periodic reviews on the policies and procedures. When you get that and there's very little control over that, past that, then I assume that members of that body may feel uncomfortable, may feel totally at odds with their normality. And that's what comes in.
Is this sorry, go ahead, Gan.
I just wanted to say to that, because I can see that sometimes, people that have interfered in cases, they might, their motives are really questioned. I personally, from the interactions that I've had with GPC members, temple presidents, managers, I don't ever think somebody's thinking, I know, I'm really going to support child abuse. I'm going to support this person that's abused a child. They genuinely think it just hasn't happened, that there's some great miscarriage of justice that's happened. It's not that we're led by a bunch of demoniac people. And even with training, sometimes I myself have been in that situation where, so I understand that aspect of it. I get it. I've had cases come in with somebody I've known very well, and I'm thinking, oh no, well, this is clearly a mistake. And only to be pointed out by my husband or Dakshina saying, can you hear yourself? I thought, oh yes, yeah. This is why some people get so much support, because of their close relationships. But yeah.
Is this kind of challenge common to all religious organizations?
Yeah.
Is it common to institutions
Yeah.
generally?
Yeah.
Is this on struggling with this kind of affinity and denial more than others, or is it just normal stuff?
If you're not that way inclined yourself, it's so hard to understand. Most people are horrified by these things, so they just trying to look for excuses for it to have not happened.
See, another thing is this aspect of institutional protectionism and awareness of mitigation of risk for an institution, right? Any institution, or quite a lot of the institutions, especially religious institutions, would want to preserve or act to preserve their reputation and also legal risk going forward. Now, my wife in her dissertation had actually written a paper about this specific aspect of how religious organizations actually manage this and how they come across. And that was quite telling. So this is there not only in ISKCON, but throughout. But what we have to do is now take a lesson, because we were far ahead of a lot of religious institutions a few years back. But religious institutions such as the Catholic Church, such as the Anglican Church, etc., through various legal acts, etc., publicity, governmental action, have had to move on. And they've progressed far ahead of how they deal with child abuse, etc., within their organizations compared to us. So now we are very much in catch-up mode, or we should be in catch-up mode, because of this aspect of we're still caught up with this reputational risk and institutional risk, rather than sort of turning around and saying, okay, if we face it head on, we deal with it head on and transparently, then our reputation increases, because then people will say, wow, okay, they're dealing with it, and they're dealing with it openly. and as does our institutional risk.
I think where the flip side happens, and what we have a major problem is when the shock has died down and we realize, yes, that person has done something. They may have confessed. The evidence may be overwhelming, and they realize, okay, this person has clearly done something, and then they still try to interfere and change and make peace so that we don't look like we're an institution that's, condoning child abuse and try to make everything look pretty. That's when the real problem starts, because you have to make the right decisions about those type of people, because you have to try to contain the risk that they pose. So when that goes out of the window for reputational, to maintain the reputation, then that's when the real problem is. And that's what we've really had major problems with. Just that non-acceptance of, there's this devotee that I know that's really, really lovely. They also have this other side to them where they've behaved like this.
We talked about the progress that maybe the Catholic Church or other institutions might have made. They've obviously had much more public scandals and maybe had greater public accountability, scrutiny, and so on. And many devotees think that it needs something like that for ISKCON leaders to take action. Would the Child Protection Office have been founded if it wasn't for the Turley case?
No.
And then once the Turley case is off the front page and maybe it's tidied up, or, at least in some minds, that's when the funding drops off and so on. What do you think the right level of commitment from ISKCON leaders should look like? What would be optimal governance, sponsorship from ISKCON leaders in terms of working with a Child Protection Office or whatever the new incarnation might be?
Again, if you don't agree with something, it's not right that you tear down everything and try to build up something as to the way that you see it. Having said that, our guidelines, our policies, our working procedures have been developed, refined, etc., over at least over 2 decades. So as far as we're concerned, that was fit for purpose. What didn't work is others coming in and trying to circumvent that to an extent through their own opinions and narratives. So going forward, I would urge that we keep what we have and support that. Why? Because our current, or the system certainly that we were working to, was set up to give a free hand, as it were, or independence to a certain extent to the Child Protection Office, according to the procedures and guidelines that were ratified by the GBC body, right? And that should be supported, empowered, etc. And trust should be given to the devotees who are carrying out that service, and their integrity should be respected, not challenged because you don't agree with a certain case and the conclusions of that case. So it's the old adage, if you don't agree, you go to the courthouse and burn it down. Is that right?
It's not that things don't have to change. Everything has to progress. Yeah. We don't have a whistleblowing policy in the current manual. Everything has to be reviewed, and something's taken out, something's changed, something's added. That's just the way life is, and that's a good thing. But we showed our policies to the professors at the university that were teaching us, and they were really impressed with it. They thought it was just really good, really good policies. And when we actually explained to them how we function in terms of finances, the amount of staff, they were saying, well, how many people are in your office? It's just us 2. He was just completely shocked. And the amount of money that we had to rely on, he asked us about the finances of it. He was just in shock. He said, that's like trying to run the FBI with no money and no staff. How can you possibly do this? You know, and we thought, yeah.
And expecting the results
Yeah.
from it.
Yeah.
How often would there be interference? I know you said that there'd be many cases that just fly under the radar, people don't even know about, but it does seem like almost every time possibly there was someone quite high profile and well connected. I think Dhir Govinda suggested, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he may have suggested that toward the end of his tenure around 2004, 80% of his time was taken up just managing interference, just dealing with unwelcome opinions about the outcome should be different or something like that. I mean,
that's completely accurate. I would say even now towards the last, well, we were in office, for 9 years. So I'd say the last 7 years I've been taken up with 99.9% just replying to an unlimited amount of, I demand to know what's happened and why has this happened, just endlessly back and forth emails trying to explain every point, every detail of the case to so many different, not even to one body, but even people from one body would ask individually, and it was just overwhelming.
We talk about interference, etc. Now, that kicks off, as we keep on saying, on high-profile cases, right? And that takes up an inordinate amount of time. If we look at high-profile cases, I think we've covered more high-profile cases than anyone else, and that's a different subject as to why that was. But if you consider that was about 10%, and let's be generous, of the total cases that we carried out. As my wife said, it took up 99% of our time fighting or responding, if you like, to various sort of inquiries, right? Coming forth, which wouldn't come forward on any other case that didn't have a profile.
Well, let's explore that a little bit, because you've said that you've tackled maybe more of these cases than previously, and there might be a reason for it. I mean, the mind boggled with the Mayapur Gurukul of how many investigations and reports had been done and were essentially ignored. And you guys finally, brought the chief offender in that regard to account. But, how many other kids got, injured, damaged in the meantime? How do we reasonably explain that? Is it that people just didn't want to know, cognitive dissonance? Was it that there was more sinister collusion around, he's our mate, we're keeping him in there?
I think for some people there might have been more sinister collusion going on. I think for the majority, it was just really hard to believe that this was happening. I remember in the year 2000, so I'd just been a part of CPO for a year, and I don't mind talking about this. I know we're not naming names and talking about cases, but that particular case, I was asked to be a panelist on it. So I read the file of BVP. I read the file, and I could see it was so clear what's been happening, that he was it didn't say that he had abused at that point, but it said he clearly knew what was going on and just completely excused it and did nothing about it, but I remember the backlash at the time. On the advice of somebody, I didn't become a panelist on that case. I was very new and I just took that advice, but for years it would play on my mind because nothing happened. He got slightly censured and nothing happened. But for years I would hear all these other complaints, and to see this person as being held up as like the Vedic Acharya and this incredible school that's been built, and the architecture of it all. But really what was going on inside, it was just continual abuse. It just never stopped from one generation to another. It was just continual. And he just continued because of his profile and his connections. Nobody could like grasp that nettle. Nobody was willing to just take it and say, this is not right, we're doing something about this, you know, until one incredibly, and this was only recent, 2022, incredibly brave person came forward and said, this is what happened to me. So then it came to our office and we dealt with it. Even then, I have to say, because of some other decisions that you'd made as director with other high profile cases and how that was taken, like one of the main high profile cases when we took over, I think everyone knows who that was. From that moment on, there was a campaign to get us out because they didn't like that decision. So when BVP's case came along and the panelists, because we don't make the decision, the panelists make the decision, and they were so horrified and they just wanted to just, you know, have him gone. And we have to weigh up things like, are the GBC going to accept this decision? You know, but later on, what I find interesting, and some people think his decision wasn't harsh enough. Later on, when another body, you know, the pastoral misleadership body,
PLMO or whatever, yeah.
PLMO, when they decided to ban him forever, you know, for good, nobody made a fuss at all. I think if the CPO had made that decision, there would have been a major uproar about it.
Can I just, you know, there is this misnomer that I'd like to clear up. In that the Child Protection Director, the International Child Protection Director, does not make decisions on cases. You know, their job primarily is to make sure that the process is being followed. And they don't make a decision as to what the outcome of a case should be. And indeed, any restrictions. It is the panelists or the judges, as we used to call them, that actually make that decision based on all the information that is gathered according to our policies and guidelines. So then to ask a child protection director to interfere past that is wrong. And it may have happened previously, it may happen going forward, etc. But as far as we were concerned, we would follow policy and procedure. And that's what it was. And that's where the rub came, in that certain decisions weren't agreed to. And then it's a case of, oh, as a child protection director, why didn't you, you know, do X, Y, and Z, or to kind of rule that this decision isn't right, or etc. You know, and that wouldn't have been right.
And in the first high-profile case that we had, where she had so much support, people that would often donate to the CPO would say, well, if you don't change the decision, I'm withdrawing my funds.
And that was a certain GBC member. She said that.
That was just blatant, you know. I'm not, and it was a very small amount of funds anyway.
Yeah,
but,
it was tiny.
You know, because we get a certain stipend from the GBC, the $10,000, and then other GBC members would make pledges, and some would pay on those pledges and some wouldn't. But to actively say on an active case that's been concluded, I don't like this decision, I'm not going to support your office financially anymore, it's just like incredible. And she also said, I'm going to withdraw my funds. And the problem with you guys is the GBC think you have too much power. And I remember we laughed at the time and she got really, really upset about it because we felt very powerless. We felt like all of our time is taken up dealing with these kinds of issues. So we just felt like we were completely powerless and having to, you know, pacify everyone, put all the fires out and everyone's minds about this miscarriage of justice, you know, when really we had no power.
Again, I'll go
all.
back to this thing. If the international office are working as per the policies and guidelines, they're not making the decisions. They're just making sure that the procedure is followed on every case. And this case that we're talking about was a catalyst, and this happened in 2018. Since then, we've been kind of working with this sort of noise coming on various cases. And also, just going back to that case, I'll give you an example of the level of, if you like, interference. 2 GBC members, had actually contacted the chair of the judges on that particular case and started questioning that person. And it got to an extent where there was attack on his personal life, and to the extent now that particular devotee, in good standing, won't carry out the service of a panelist. And he'd been doing that for many years.
You mentioned that the campaign really sort of kicked off back then, and we all saw it. We all witnessed these public discrediting. And I think I mentioned to you earlier, there was a lot of what I thought was quite straw man arguments. You were being accused of not following due process. Now, you've spoken at length already in this session about how there are so many policies. They've been examined even by experts in the field, like your professors. You've undertaken master's degrees. Both of you have master's degrees in advanced child protection. So you've taken your service seriously. To my understanding, you really do go to great pains to follow those processes, which ensure, a proper weighing of evidence by impartial people and so on. How is it? Like, is it just sort of dirty propaganda? What is there anything in these don't follow due process kind of accusations?
Well, the main antagonist, that was saying that, I wrote back to him so many times saying, "Can you please point out? We would like to know. Can you please point out where we have not followed due process?" And I think he replied back once and said, "Well, you didn't do this." And then I told him what we had done, and it just wouldn't leave it alone. Just never ever leaving it alone, and just saying, we don't have that degree. We didn't follow process. It was just, it was all about personal bias all the time. It just went on and on and on and on. And one of the most humiliating things, actually, out of the whole of I think it's 26 years I've been doing this now. One of the most humiliating things I've experienced, and I've been screamed and shouted at many temple council meetings where people don't agree with local decisions, or to speak of international ones. But I had to, someone was advocating on our behalf to the GBC, and he asked me if I could, send proof of the fact that we had these degrees. And I had to scroll through my phone to find our graduation ceremonies because certificates can be faked. And I was like, oh, that was a very low point for me. Because that degree was hard fought, wasn't it? We're not young.
How many years of study?
3.
It was 2 years of study, but at our age, it was a master's. It was a stretch, it was hard.
Yeah, and why did we carry that out? It wasn't for self-aggrandizement. Yeah, we paid for it. It wasn't to big ourselves up or for our ego. It was for the service, to improve what we can bring into our service and into ISKCON. That was the main motivation.
Because I think we always felt hopeful, didn't we, that we were going to carry on and things were going to get better. And at some point we would be properly funded. Everyone could be qualified doing this service. And I think we were just always quite hopeful.
And it wasn't just for us. We were looking at, okay, let's bring in a mentor system right from temple child protection teams all the way up to the international director. And kind of mentor devotees into the service rather than just throw them in and say, right, this one's gone, you need to take over. There's no continuity then, there's no safety, there is no sense of training, etc., rather than throwing devotees into the deep end and then they exit or they're made to exit. So that was a kind of motivation behind it.
And it sounded like I said, this was a very obvious campaign. We could all see it, the public running down of the team and its policies and procedures, just an attempt to discredit all the way through. I guess it didn't come as a surprise when all of a sudden you were just informed your tenure will end. We've decided that you should be retired. You've done your stint. Term limits just magically. And that became, it seems like, the vehicle to exit you. I mean, were you already feeling like, okay, fair enough? Or was it that this was forced on you? And it was just, well, these people just aren't compliant, so we need to move them on. I mean, how do you feel about how that whole thing happened, how you were treated, what process was followed, even in terms of employer-employee or whatever?
I remember we had a conversation with the GBC EC by phone when we were visiting Nadia in Alatra, Nadia Namal, and we had this conversation, and the conversation, they kept saying, you haven't been fired. We said, but you've set up a task force to replace us without telling us. We found out by accident. And this task force had already been in place for 2 months.
To find a successor.
That's being fired, but you just didn't bother to tell us. No. And then they kept saying this excuse and that excuse. And when I kept trying to get to the bottom of it by just repeating my question, they said, if you're just going to carry on like this, we don't want to repeat ourselves. But it was just gaslighting, basically. When someone has actively set up a team to replace you and you don't know about it, you're fired. There's just no way around that. And that was just such a horrible way to find out as well. That was just awful.
Were performance criteria ever in place, and were you ever given feedback against criteria, or was it always just this hearsay? We believe you're not following due process because we don't like the conclusions you arrive at.
Let me give you another example. Following high-profile cases, as it always is, there was one person especially who was aligned to the accused and didn't believe the decision that actually came out against the accused, and as were many GBC members. And they insisted that the process that we had followed wasn't right, etc., and insisted that the GBC agreed to a full review of the CPO, a full review. So a review committee was formed by the GBC body, mainly comprising of lawyers, plus this person who's also a lawyer, to look into the full review of the CPO workings, procedures, etc. Now, this body put together points that they wanted to cover, i.e. to answer the questions and get the answers that hopefully they require or what they suspected was going wrong. So this review body then put together a working committee. So they thought, well, hold on, let's get someone else to do the heavy lifting. We'll get all the information and then we'll go on from there. Surprisingly, we were not added to any one of those two bodies initially. So we argued and said, well, hold on, how can you hold a review without the persons who are actually carrying out the service? How are you going to get an insight on both sides? So we fought for it, and it was a hard battle to get onto the working committee. That comprised of about 12 devotees. And we met every other weekend for at least 2 hours online, and also assigned various tasks to look into research, etc. in the meantime. And that took 18 months. A report was compiled on that, not just on the points that were put forward originally by the review committee, but additional points. The sum and the bonum of that was that there aren't many concerns about the workings and carrying out and policies that we carried out during our management. But there was a whole raft of improvements in terms of support that the International Office and Child Protection needed as far as ISKCON is concerned. That went back to the review committee. They considered it and they said, no, we're just going to put forward, but we're going to compile our report and put that forward to the GBC, which again didn't cover everything that the working committee had put forward. So again, there was another hard fought battle to have both of them put forward to the GBC body. Now, you know, how much notice was taken of the report from the working committee compared to the review committee, because don't forget the review committee, most of them were made up of members, if you like, or associated members of the GBC body. So this is the
people with child protection backgrounds.
No.
Yeah. So this is the
background
background that we're talking about, and there wasn't child protection backgrounds per se. It's mostly legal. So I'll go back to this thing of risk management, reputational management through legal processes.
It does strike me. I've noticed this a lot. I don't want to speak for all lawyers in the society because there's probably a whole spectrum of lawyers. I know there's some very active, supportive lawyers who are members of Vedic Inquirer. But it is shocking at times how often lawyers seem to want to come to the defense of the abused, of the abuser. Like it's almost like a knee-jerk reaction that, I mean, we've heard of very senior GBC legal professionals who've passed little notes to abusers during interviews, basically advising, you know, take the fifth on this one and stuff. It's a real surprise. I wonder, I mean, obviously we've been talking about a campaign to unseat you, and it feels like eventually the route that we've just spoken about resulted in that. And now we have Champa who's kind of in a holding position. I don't even quite know exactly what. She's not the permanent head, is she? Or
temporary, while there's a transitional period.
And of course, she is the former CPO director. You inherited the CPO from her. What impressions did you form based on what you inherited about her own credentials, competence, abilities, and all of this? I'm mindful that, you know, she's got a legal background and we're not wanting to blaspheme, but it's a genuine, you know, is this going to be a step forward or is this going to be a step backward? What's your sense?
I think it's a major step backwards. And I think I'm still in shock that this has happened, that out of everybody, anyone that they could have chosen, you know, they chose somebody who they actually let go, because although they deny that they let her go, we were part of the conversations at the time. So we know what happened. She wasn't very good at that service and participated in it very little, because myself and Dakshina were going through all the cases the other day and about which director's done how many cases. And the 6 cases that she did, I was either, myself and Dakshina and you were either panelists for it or case managers for it, for them all, more or less. So, you know, and I think she had a very bad communication style. She just never got back to people. And I think that was why we were told they were letting her go. So the fact that we've come full circle and they're putting her back in, even in a temporary position, is quite shocking to me. And the way she handled something in particular that happened in the UK in 2016, I have more or less stopped all communication with her. I can't deal with that level of, I don't know what to say, that level of just sheer, not just the incompetency, but the willingness to override certain rules that she did. And I kind of haven't gotten over that. That's just me personally. My husband has worked with her since, but I think it was a massive mistake. I don't agree with this new system, but I think to put her even temporarily in charge, sorry if this is offensive to you, John Blutter, if you're watching, but the mind boggles. It really, really does.
You've spoken there of the new system. And can you break it down? Because you've been close to this, and I believe you raised objections as you heard about the planned new system. Essentially, there is no CPO. Yeah. Although India might have its own CPO, I don't quite understand how that works. But now I think cases will go to Champa Kalada. She'll farm them out instead of to the trained CPO panelist to investigate and those kind of things. These now just get given to lawyers. Is that the essence of it, or is there more to it? Please give us a level of detail about how it's supposed to work and whether you think it will work, and whether it's a step forward or a step backwards.
There's more to it, but essentially, the operation of it and the scrutiny of cases, to me, has been diluted, and it's gone more on the legalistic stance rather than our set procedures, our set guidelines. I'll give you an example. A case comes in, it goes to a body called CPOC, if you like, via the international director. CPOC, if we look at the makeup, is essentially lawyers involved in that, 2 lawyers and 1 layperson. So then my argument is, well, hold on, what experience is there and what background is there as far as child protection is concerned? Now, one of the lawyers has turned around and said, well, I represented a victim, and I've also represented a person who was accused, right? Does that necessarily give a thorough understanding of child protection and all that involves? I guess not. So it's moving, and I keep on saying it's moving to more towards mitigating risk and preserving so-called reputation for an organization, rather than looking at child abuse and dealing with that.
Yes, I mean, it strikes me it's like a defensive play. How do we make sure that this is, does the least amount of damage possible, possibly might be the thought process. My sense is that you had several functions. Investigating incidents of abuse or reports of abuse was one. You also did quite a lot in education. I would also imagine that your approachability as investigators is a big part of why a victim might choose to open up. And I asked some questions to the GBC about this. What's going to make a victim equally comfortable reporting to someone who hasn't got a child protection background, may in fact, as you described there, Kamalesh, have a defend-us gone at all costs kind of mindset? I mean, lawyers can be quite intimidating at times. Just, I wonder what you think. I mean, how do you envision the new process will play out in practice? Will there be devastating problems? Will it just be, slightly regressive, but otherwise non-eventful? I'm just curious what you think will play out.
I think one of the accusations that was held at the ICPO a lot was you shouldn't be a child advocate judge, investigator, and jury. But what we repeatedly said was that these were all different departments within this body. It's not that, that my husband's the director, he's going to do the investigation, he's going to make the decision, he's going to do it's not set up like that. There were different functions. So one Swami that I had a very long back and forth with just kept saying the same thing, and he said we need independent investigators. And I was saying, but they would still need child protection training, which would fall under our ISKCON child protection training. Whether we gave them that training or someone independent gave them that training, it's still the same training because they're following ISKCON's policies. So it didn't matter because years ago, when the office had more money, there were independent investigators, but they were part of the CPO, but they were independent, just as the panelists, the review panelists who actually make the decision, they get the case file when it's completed. They look what's been investigated, who said what, how someone has responded, and they make a decision based on that. They're also independent in one way from the directorship, because they're the ones that are making the decision. The director is there to just guide them to follow the policies.
Again, sorry.
So I heard recently that the new system are actually hiring their independent investigators via India, and that just really alarmed me. I don't know if that's true, but that's just what I heard. But there's no reason why it can't all be in one body and everyone's having the right training.
One thing I would say is we have to understand what the process is and how each process works. And if someone really scrutinizingly looks at the policies and guidelines, you will see the firewalls within it to preserve integrity, to preserve independence, and to preserve fairness. So let's just look at this thing of investigation. What is investigation and how does that happen? Quite a lot of the people have this perception that investigation involves an investigation that, let's say, the police carry out, right? There will surveillance, they will question, they will interrogate is a wrong word, but they will drill down quite a bit. We don't do that within ISKCON, and majority of the religious organizations that we've worked with don't do that. The process is quite simple, and it's set quite simply in terms of what information is gathered, from whom, and how is that shared with all parties and rebuttals. That is investigation, right? It's not that, we go out there and we say, oh, okay, we surveillanced X, Y, and Z. Based on that, they said this, etc.
Or take people's laptops.
Another thing is sometimes character references, right, are misconstrued as statements or evidence statements, right? They're not. So there's a lot of misunderstanding about what different things are. So if we farm out, let's say, investigation, which the new process is advocating, what are they going to do? They're only going to gather the statements and the relevant documentation, etc., right? Is that any different to what we ask devotees to do when they carry out that service? And are we questioning the integrity of those devotees or integrity of all the devotees at different levels because we don't agree with the conclusion?
Something you mentioned earlier, and it does come up from time to time, the fact that the GBC want to appoint and therefore retain the power to dismiss the CPO director seems an inherent problem. I'm curious of how other organizations do this. Many people say, well, it should just be purely independent, not accountable to the GBC. I've got a feeling the GBC interpret their own supreme authority, or whatever it is, ultimate managing authority, to mean they can never be accountable to anybody else. And therefore, the idea of the CPO not being accountable to them would be almost a kind of heresy. How do other organizations do this? How do other entities do this?
You know, it's really interesting because me and my husband watched this documentary recently about the police, about how they look at the discrepancies that go on with their own officers. And we were really shocked, weren't we? Because there was one officer that he'd done lots and lots of different petty crimes within his job as a police officer, and his superiors were really upset with him and actually took legal action against him. And for one reason or another, through the court system, he just kept finding loophole after loophole to keep his job, and he did keep his job. So they did an internal review procedure and sacked him, and we were really shocked that they had the ability. People don't go to jail when they've been found guilty via the CPO. They have restrictions put on them, like they can't give class or be a leader, or sometimes they have a ban for a certain amount of time, a restriction from a certain amount of time. It's nothing very, very drastic, you know. But this person lost his job, even though the court said there was no legal way he could lose his job. They made that internal decision, and it was completely fine and legal, wasn't it?
Yeah. So
all these bodies have their own internal procedures. We have our ecclesiastic one. I think the Catholic Church do as well, because they have the power to move people on or keep people in positions. They're making their own internal decisions.
So the Catholic Church, answer to your question about GBC, the ability to hire and fire the international director, that's fine, because ultimately we do need sanction and we do need appointment. It's not that, we'll need a body to appoint, if you like, various officers to carry out various functions. But under what reference does that happen? We have clear reference from where it was set up and refined, as I said earlier on, in that the GBC body, yes, they can hire and fire the international director. And the policies and guidelines are reviewed periodically and ratified by the GBC, right? But the independence or the non-interference is also there, which isn't adhered to. Not many years back, the GBC body were continually reminded not to interfere by its own body. But they've moved away from that again and totally jumped in because they didn't agree with certain decisions. And it's being diluted even more as we go forward and becoming more and more legalistic, which means that quite a few of these cases won't even be looked at because a certain strata or body, which again is appointed by the GBC or deemed to be appointed, will say, well, no, it doesn't hold water or whatever, and it'll be disregarded. Then what will happen? Victims won't come forward because of confidence. Victims are quite careful when they come forward because, again, they're in that spotlight. And they're reliving the abuse that they've been through. And it's not a comfortable position to be in. So it takes a lot of courage for devotees to come forward and divulge what they've been through and then go through a scrutinizingly painful process. Add to that mix that they may not be believed, minimized. And at times we've had victims blamed, vilified, etc. Add that to the mix. And you ain't going to have a purposeful child protection service as we should have within ISKCON. And what does that lead to? We had the Turley case. I feel convinced that at some point in history, we're going to have another big
we will.
legal case.
Yeah.
You know, there's so many examples where that is already setting a precedent, and devotees are talking. But I can't say too much. But that's my biggest fear, is that will happen. Why is that fear there? It's for the organization. It's for Srila Prabhupada's ISKCON.
Can I just say to
Yeah,
one
go ahead.
about the new system? A really important point is that so lots of devotees, I've seen it on the Vedic Inquirer, they said this should just go to the police, and I see that question a lot. Why isn't it gone to the police? Why? And that's our policy. And for us, it's a lot easier if it goes down that route. You know, it's not always successful, but then they can always come back to the CPO. And I've done it myself, but I've personally seen Dakshina do it a lot, hand-holding, comforting, walking, encouraging them to report. It's very, very, very difficult and scary thing to do, to report to either the police or social services that you think there's abuse going on with your child or someone else's child. It's terrifying, actually. So I think so sometimes they often choose the CPO, but I think that the new system where they're having independent investigators as well is going to put people off disclosing abuse, because it's going to be very similar to that process. Somebody they don't know, they're having to tell everything to someone they have no relationship, no confidence in. I think it's just going to put people off massively reporting, making disclosures.
I think that sometimes people are just gobsmacked. They hear something like, as we've been talking about, Anadesh Vapu, Ross Wexler, and his crimes over decades.
Yeah.
And the result is he gets some restrictions. Whereas people are going, why isn't this a custodial sentence?
Yeah.
Now, I understand there are all kinds of complexities. Indian law, statutes of limitations and various other things. What's your view? I mean, is it still that the deterrents internally are really quite feeble?
Actually, our policy is that any instance or concern about child abuse should be totally and reported to the sectarian authorities such as police, social services, etc., come what may. That's within our policy. That has to happen as a first stage. As far as internal procedures are concerned, we have to be governed by ecclesiastical law. We can't send anyone to prison. We can't put punitive actions that the courts can on if you like, the accused. So we have to work within the framework that we have, but work diligently on that and not suppress it, not change it, not bury it, not vary it. That is the importance of doing everything as per procedure. And, be it a pot washer who's just walked in or a big guru and a sannyasi, we can't differentiate, and we shouldn't differentiate.
Excuse me, about to sneeze.
Bless you.
Bless you.
Thank you. Okay. Now, we've spoken quite a bit about the leadership, and it seemed to being confused about misplaced loyalties, all kinds of things that are going on. Are there instances where you've really felt great levels of support from leadership that we could at least explore to give us hope? Long delay, that says it all.
Again, I'll go back to this aspect. There are some. I'll go back to this aspect that I firmly believe there isn't a devotee in ISKCON that wants to support child abuse. I don't think that's there, right? But what is the viewpoint? Where are the sticking points, and where is the myopia? And what causes that myopia is something that we need to look at. And going back to your question, do we feel that, was there any instance where we got support? Well, yes.
Yeah.
There have been. but it's outweighed by the breaks that have been there for various reasons.
Mm.
What about community attitudes? In the time that you've been at the helm, is it that, putting leadership responses to one side for a moment, is it the community is becoming more vigilant and more compassionate and more informed, or is there just as much problem with denial and other problematic responses?
I've noticed a huge wave of support from community, more than ever actually, and I think, but of course when you're talking about individual cases and people that are related to the accused, it can be, there's a lot of denial there and campaigning and whatnot, but I think overall I think when devotees understand what CPO do, what the policies are, they're quite surprised, pleasantly surprised. When you took over in 2016, I don't know, you couldn't do it for some reason, but myself and Dakshina held a questions and answers. I had never done it before. We both felt really nervous about it. And devotees came in kind of like this, like, I'm going to challenge the CPO. Why don't you do this? Oh, we do. This is what we do. Oh, okay. Well, why aren't you doing this? Well, we do that, And I felt that everyone left that meeting like fully supporting the CPO because they just had more understanding of what the CPO actually do and what they can't do, So I think that mood has generally increased. I think that's been the amazing thing about the last 9 years, that we really have felt so much support from the community, actually, really a lot. And that's gone a long way to, sustaining us in this role.
In a way, if we look back, when we first started the role in international office, and this is a personal opinion, a total personal opinion, I feel the confidence in child protection by the community was quite low for various reasons. We took over and the message was quite clear as far as we were concerned, in that we will follow a case regardless of who it is, right, for the sake of the case. And that sent a loud message out there, especially with the first high-profile case that we dealt with soon after taking over. And we wouldn't, for want of a better word, acquiesce or bend. And that sent a message out there that, these guys, perhaps we can sort of speak to them. We will be heard. And a fair process will be undertaken. So this is reflective if we look at the numbers. Dhira Govinda Prabhu had done approximately 100 cases, right? But that was on
more,
that was on the back of the Turley case, the support that the leadership gave. Oh, we must deal with this right away. The community awareness of child protection, that something must be done, and of course, the extensive funding, which was over $150,000 a year. So he was able to do that over that period of time. Then Tamahara Prabhu took over, and again, the confidence was there, and he carried out about, I think, 6 or 7 cases.
9, I think.
9 cases, because, the bulk of it had been done previously. Champakalata took over, and she carried out 6 cases during her tenure. But by this time, confidence was waning as to, the want of a better word, would people be heard? Would it be a fair process, et cetera, et cetera? And, let's say it was. And then we took over at a fairly low ebb, and we had to build, and we built that up.
How many cases?
I think about 38, right?
And you had a real backlog as well, right?
Yeah, 38 adjudicated cases. But there were a number of local cases, a number of other areas that we got involved in. For example, training, but also things like Bangladesh, things like certain things that happen in India, etc., that don't necessarily go to but we have to deal with those sort of instances, the Vrindavan Gurukul, etc. So, we've done a lot. And this has garnered or brought about confidence from the community, which I think sometimes is downplayed or not quite accepted by certain quarters. And we haven't gone out there to put forward propaganda, look at what we're doing, etc. It's just purely from the service that we've carried out and how we've carried it out that the community see. Now, a lot of them won't be vocal and they won't come forward, but that confidence in us carrying out that service and from the feedback that we've got has been loud and clear.
Many instances of child abuse in ISKCON happened in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and the world was a little bit more naive in those days. Safeguards weren't like they should be. Vigilance wasn't. Background checks, these weren't things that were on people's radar in those days. Are children now naturally safer? Is it just that most of the boarding schools, which were the highest risk, have closed? Because there still are boarding schools. I'm seeing a real shaking of the head, Kamalesh. So, are children safer?
Answer to your question, are children safer? To a certain extent, yes, because there's more awareness.
But we have the internet now.
Yeah, and we have other risks that weren't there in the 70s and 80s. As Gandharvika says, the internet and the arena of child protection has moved on. So are children safer? A short answer to that is I would say no, but the picture may have changed a tad, right? May have changed a tad. So
we have there's ISKCON has four we were told boarding schools in Russia. We've done no CPO training in Russia. We just haven't. We've been firefighting basically since we took over. It's just been case after case after case after case. We haven't had time to do the training there. We've done lots of training in Europe, but we haven't. No one's been to Russia yet. There's 4 boarding schools there. What's happening there?
That we're not informed of.
No idea about it.
Not only Russia, but I don't even know the number of schools in India that may be affiliated to ISKCON and may not directly be ISKCON.
Especially our own school, the Vrindavan Gurukul, which keeps us awake at night.
Yeah, Vrindavan Gurukul is frightening.
It's terrifying.
In that we talked about Bhaktividya Purna earlier on, and it took 3 cases over a period of time to have something conclusive done. 3. And during that time, and all 3 cases were reported to our leadership, and they didn't take effective compliance or action on that. Rather, there was kind of, brushing it aside, etc., and also support, even to the end, support, in recognition of his service and this, that, and the other. Now, overlay that onto, let's say, Vrindavan Gurukul. I feel very strongly about Vrindavan Gurukul. We've had, prior to us taking over, a paedophile raping children, and he went to prison in the school. He went to prison. Then we had the poor child drowning, Kartik, in the pool. The accusation at that time was, well, it's the CPO's fault, i.e. my fault, that I was party to removing the teacher or the PE teacher who would have been in charge at that time and looked after the children. Supervising them. But because of child protection issue, he was removed. So if we hadn't removed it, the child wouldn't have drowned. So it's our fault. So
the teachers actually blamed my husband for that child's death.
So that's
what we're dealing with.
So that's that. Then at that time, we'd set up a process where we would log all concerns. of varying kind of risk, varying seriousness within the school. And it was recorded on the spreadsheet. And again, a devotee from Australia, Vishalini, who has a very strong background on these things in the judicial system in Australia. She set this system up, set up a working mechanism, and we recorded over 60 of these concerns. Then we were told, oh, okay, you're not allowed in the school anymore. Nor was a local CPT director of Vrindavan. So totally shut out. What happens? Overnight, more or less, through, various visits and, Pancharatna Prabhu, etc., without carrying out any extensive, as far as we know, sort of scrutiny, it was reported there were 0 cases and concerns.
Yeah, but in between that, Naveen Krishna and his team went in, and we were like, "Oh, great! They're respected devotees. They're going to go and do an inspection," and they did, and they found many concerns, reported it. Nothing happened, no response at all. And then Pancharatna did his report and said, I went in, inspected it all, there's nothing, no issues, nothing. So it's gone from 62 issues and concerns. Naveen Krishna in between with his team and his concerns to 0. And nobody, no CPO person, not the Vrindavan CPO director, not you, no one was allowed in that school.
So added to that, if you look at that, right, and then think, well, hold on, we've got this BVP case as an example, 3 cases until it eventually happened, and it was abusing in the meantime, right? And we didn't take much notice of the previous 3. What is going to happen with the Vrindavan Gurukul? Because that will come out.
Yeah.
And
so I mean, this all raises the kind of unusual case of ISKCON India. So if we think about ground zero for abuse, you've got New Vrindavan, you've got Dallas Gurukul, and Gurukuls all around the world that might have had various histories. But typically we think of ISKCON Vrindavan and ISKCON Mayapur as ground zero, just with the people who were at the helm for long periods, the abusive regimes that they had, that went on unchecked for decades. How do we understand that ISKCON India does not want to be accountable to an international CPO effort? Was it just a personal issue with you? Was it just a desire to be unaccountable and give extra lenience or latitude for their own people? How do we explain it?
Well,
and more surprisingly, that the GBC said, sure,
yeah,
you can have your own little...
I think you asked a while ago, like what will change? What have we learned? To me, like from having a figure like BVP and all that history that we all know about now, including the GBC, they know about that history. They know all the blocks that were in place. It just seems like to have a situation like this in India, in our own ISKCON Vrindavan school, is just like beyond belief that is still happening now. That still no one's allowed to get in there. It's like I was talking to someone the other day and they were saying it's beyond reckless. Even if that school had a good reputation to begin with, which it doesn't, it already has one of the worst reputations for abuse in our society. How is it possible that after we've seen what happened with BVP, we still can't get in that school? I don't know how that's possible. I can't explain why the GBC, who were almost on the verge of closing it down when my husband did a report to them, they were all in favour, right, we're closing that school down, and at the last minute changed their mind. So they all know that something is not right with that school and no one can get access to that school. But I think it's just taken a backward leap into, hitting a few kids is okay, or I don't really know. I can't understand it. It's baffling, shocking, and worrying.
So going back to this question about India and the Bharat child protection, as they call themselves. I get the feeling that the India leadership is turning around and saying, we want to determine and manage ourselves, rather than these outsiders from the West, etc., coming in and telling us what we should do. We're a strong yatra. We're one of the strongest and wealthiest yatras in ISKCON now, and we should be allowed to determine what we do, how we do it, and we're not having someone from outside telling us what to do. And that really is a push. My
And it's
response,
red flags all over it, right?
yeah, my response to that was, well, you know, if the international office were to be independent and seen as independent, non-biased, etc., then where is the objection? In that adjudication, if you like, if a case happened in India, will be done totally independently outside India. And India can then have devotees adjudicating cases from the rest of ISKCON or parts of ISKCON. It's not that, you know, there won't be participation. From day one, I was asking the GBC body to put forward and resource devotees from India to cover all of India through 4 directors and fund those offices, and that didn't come. And every presentation that I made, that was my request. This wouldn't come. So it wasn't a case of we, as international office, we didn't want participation, input, etc. from India. We did. And also preserve the, if you like, non-biased independence of processing these cases.
Mindful we're coming up on the 90-minute mark, and I don't want to eat your entire weekend. This has been great. I got the sense when we first met prior to going live that you're still very actively involved in child protection, even if it's without being official office bearers or something. Is that right? You're
bit.
still quite active?
There's some residual things that have had to be, you know, sort of loose ends tied up and things like that. But also we have to figure out lots of things going forward. Like some of the panelists that we've trained have been in touch, and there's lots of discussion about that. They don't want to work for the new system. So it's like, you know, maybe trying to get their names off our database, and what else could we do? We've been asked to do training in Europe for different temples, but we're not sure if we're allowed to do it, or, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, one thing is that we don't want to come across as, if you like, proponents of discord.
Yeah.
And to be critical and put our own sort of thing forward through propaganda or whatever. You know, what we want to do is to advocate proper child protection and make sure that that happens for ISKCON. Now, I've literally tried to not get involved at that level, because since we left and just before we left, a lot of devotees have got in touch. You know, quite a few leaders have got in touch and said, well, we still want your input. We still want you to carry out training for our people and our management and this, that, and the other. And we don't agree with X, Y, and Z. And we've avoided getting involved at that level. You know, so that's where we are at the moment. And our time is very much taken up with that still, of trying to guide, trying to counsel.
The biggest obstacles the society needs to tackle if it's really going to optimize child protection?
I mean, they have to fund. I mean, I think firstly, because of the new system, they have to make sure that people have faith in that system, and I think that's like a massive mountain to climb, because of how they've, you know, ousted us, how they've just, there's been zero consultation. Absolutely no consultation. We found things out through the ISKCON news, for goodness sake, you know, like that directly involve us. So there has to be some faith built up and some trust in that new system. It has to be funded, and they have to do a lot of training.
I think, a key word is to build integrity and the trust up again. And that is going to be a steep hill from what we're hearing.
Yeah.
Because at the moment is coming across very much as legalistic, protectionistic, etc., rather than, what do we actually do for child protection? Because it is not leadership or organizational protection. The title is child protection. And it's not that, a complaint comes in and we don't scrutinizingly go through the process and make sure it's right and come with the right decision at the end of it. And it's not that we're totally biased and say, yes, you're purporting to be a victim. Of course you are, and then push it to the hilt. No, it has to be a balanced viewpoint.
Last couple of questions. So now you're no longer constrained by ISKCON's institutional expectations. Is there anything you'd like to share, something that perhaps you weren't previously able to share?
There's so much, but I think it might need another podcast. I was thinking of doing my own podcast called Unredacted, but I don't. There's just so many things. There's, we it's for us. It's not about us and what's happened to us. We still feel just so passionately that the new system, I would like to even fight for that to be more accepted and be better. It's not dependent on our personalities or, we just want the right thing to be done. When we were doing the training was fantastic, actually. And we built up so many great lifelong friendships with devotees that came and did that training. And I just feel sad that that's been dismantled, and I don't know what the training is going to be like going forward, but I just wish we could, I just wish the whole system could improve, be funded, improved, have devotees that have proper training doing this service. It's so,
and
for me, it feels like
supportive.
we've taken a step backwards. We had so much support from the community and almost none from the leadership. But this is what the community wants. This is what the community trusted. And now that's kind of shifted. And I just feel like that's just such a shame.
It's sad when trust, confidence in an organization or a function of the organization declines or is taken away. In a way, it's like abuse. Here we go again. And people feel then disenfranchised. Oh, I'll carry on with my own spiritual practice, but hey, do I have that enthusiasm anymore? Perhaps not.
It's very sad that we are absolutely no different to the Catholic Church or any other organization that's covered up abuse, shifted people from one place to another. And even with their millions and millions that they've invested in it, they still kind of do it. Look what happened to the Archbishop Justin Welby recently. It's still going on, but at least they're still, they're still doing something about it. And we're absolutely no different. We have the same hierarchical setup, which is part of the problem. From the research that I did, this is part of the problem. And people have problems when they're really going through, a white knuckle time. They can't reveal their mind in confidence that we're supposed to be able to do in our devotional lives. There's too much at stake. Everyone has too much at stake. Everyone's got too much to lose. And I think that is part of the issue of why our leaders will not face what's happened in our society. It happens in outside society. It happens in our society. We have to just accept it. Do something about it. Take action.
If we take action and we meet it head on and we're transparent about that, just imagine the confidence of the community and all the devotees internally, externally. people would turn around and say, wow, these guys are really
Look what
meeting
they're
it head
doing.
on.
Yeah.
They're dealing with it rather than trying to hide
Mm.
it, etc. You know, it'll go through the roof. But why
Yeah.
can't we do that? Why?
There's such fear around it, such fear around being exposed as not being the perfectly ideal Vaishnavas that we, you know.
And then when something comes out, it's more devastating
Mm.
because we're purported to be X, Y, and Z. And it's been different to what it was. You know, look at what we've had on, you know, we talk about BVP quite a bit, but look at what happened there and the reputation for our managing body. Why didn't you do something, etc.? Yes, they can try to deflect it and say, oh, this is what we did, and there is such and such history. But ultimately, if you want to be the ultimate management authority, the buck stops there.
Yeah.
Well, and as you've said, you know, we just had that thing with the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was forced to stand down. He didn't do it of his own volition. It must have eventually been shown, you know, that he had to do it.
Yeah.
But it's scary that we don't see any ISKCON leaders falling on their swords. We don't see any of them standing down in respect of sort of abject failure in these regards. And that's a worry. I'm mindful.
They don't recognize that there's abject failure there.
Yeah.
They don't recognize that they may be a part or a cog in that possible failure or shortfall. They don't recognize that, unfortunately, from what I see.
Especially about this issue.
Well, and like I mentioned earlier, they've interpreted ultimate managing authority in a way that actually places them beyond redress. And that's a very dangerous situation to be in. My sense is it's definitely not what Srila Prabhupada had in mind. And, you know, his organization and certainly the children of the organization deserve enlightened leadership.
Well, I mean, the one thing that stands out to me the most, all these things are going on. Like we're, you know, in certain cases, we've having to reply to GBC members or temple presidents or management, you know, explaining the ins and outs of the case and why this decision was made, and they're arguing back and forth. In the meantime, there's a child that's been hurt in the middle of it, and all this information is going back and forward over their heads, and absolutely nobody is thinking about them, what's happened to them, how it's impacted their lives, how it's going to continue to impact their lives as they get older. They're completely forgotten about. And that's what's really tragic about it all. It just becomes a big political football and just jostling back and forward. But there's people, individuals in the middle of it who have been hurt and are completely forgotten. That's so tragic.
If you just picture a whole room, lots of noise, people talking, and there's a child in the middle saying, excuse me, please hear me. And that voice is not being heard. Quite a lot of the time you'll turn around and say, yeah, but they're not a child anymore. But what they went through and that abuse that they went through, they've lived that throughout their lives into adulthood. And it's even more acute in adulthood than it was when they were a child. So there's still that child's voice there within the adult.
Well, and as you've indicated, there are these different aspects of child protection: prevention and information. When incidents happen, investigation and, you know, redress. But then victim support or victim rehabilitation or whatever. What should the society be doing if it really wants to, you know, help with the healing of people who are still recovering and may still have their lives deranged by what's happened to them when they were children?
There's various things, isn't it? You know, when we get complaints coming through and people disclosing their abuse, quite a lot of the time they're wanting acknowledgement from the institution that I was abused, and we acknowledge that. That's one. Two, ongoing support as far as things like therapy, etc., is concerned. And we don't have that. Our meager funds that we had, and there's this misnomer that, international office had thousands of dollars. That isn't the case. We get $10,000 given to us, if you like, from the GBC body and a few other donations. And quite honestly, it's not going to go in a good year. It wouldn't go over 20,000, right? Albeit it's publicized that, last year the GBC pledged 50,000, didn't receive that at all, right? So anyway, that's funding. And most of our funding that we got was given to victims for their therapy. It didn't come from any other ISKCON source. It had to come out from our meager budget.
In one case, some ISKCON leaders paid for some therapists.
Yeah, they did.
Actually.
They did, to be fair. They did.
Be fair about that. But
they did.
It's not very often, but they need ongoing support. They need, a functioning CPO, because most of the time, actually, when I was listening to one of your interviews recently, sort of in preparation for this, and you were talking about one, everyone knows who that victim is, and when I was hearing some comments about what had happened to her, I was just like, oh gosh, it's just so awful that this is how this person is identified now in their life and forevermore because of this unresolved case. And it's excruciating to hear those details. And I think that's what people want. They want an office that's completely run. Confidentiality is,
key.
Kept, processes followed, and at the end of it, they're supported, and they can stay in the society that they grew up in, without this stigma. It's just, that's what needs to happen.
So mindful that we're at 100 minutes. We're 100 minutes in. So I might move to a closing statement from each of you. And this might be a lengthy statement. So your messages, and I'm going to give you several different groups that I invite you to have messages for. The society's leaders, the devotee community in general, victims, parents, and people are maybe just about to get married and have kids and all of those kind of things. Let me see if there's any others, and I'll put these in the back channel just so you've got them as a reference. But yeah, what would your messages of encouragement or recommendations be to leaders, community, victims, parents?
My thing to parents would be, you're responsible for your child 100%. Child protection of your child starts at home completely. You have to educate them how to protect themselves. Don't leave it to anyone else. If your child is going to a school or a gurukul, you check what policies they have. Let that body know you're on top of this, and you want to find out what criminal records checks have been done, what safeguarding policies they have, whether it's a school or sports venue, anything like that. Don't leave your child unsupervised at a temple. It's not safe. Don't think anyone else can look after them unless you've done all of these checks and balances. Most devotees are completely trustworthy, but you don't take that risk. That would be my advice to parents. It's your responsibility to, make sure all these checks and balances are done.
Messages to leaders, message to community in general, messages to victims.
I'll let you do that.
Leaders, as both of us have said so much, in that as far as child protection is concerned, please trust in the integrity of the devotees carrying out that service. Don't be fearful of reputational risk or legal risk. Yes, cover the areas to make sure that we're not open to some of these risks. And let's look at legal risk. If we don't deal with child protection in the right way and address it, then that is a greater legal risk than anything else. So leaders, please, be open, trust, and empower the devotees that are carrying out this difficult service. Added to that, avail yourself to training.
Yeah.
So you're aware, you know what the policies are, what the procedures are, and what it should be. And don't be swayed by your own opinion, your own so-called bias or unconscious bias, or what is being told to you, right? Try to stay balanced on that. As far as community is concerned, a lot of water has gone under the bridge. If the leaders and the society were to move towards this end goal, then move along with it. Don't be, support it.
Be open to
Be
it.
open to it. Contribute to it. Speak to your leaders and tell them what you feel, what you want, etc. Not necessarily for us, but for child protection as a whole. Don't just kind of turn around and say, well, there's not a great deal we can do. We feel X, Y, and Z, but we're just going to carry on the way that we are, because that doesn't engender anything. It just engenders this feeling that, oh, well, just carry on with what it is amongst the leadership, etc., because no one else feels strongly about it. Victims, please be assured that someone will listen. Someone will do the right thing. Someone will support you. So if we can get the leadership perspective right, community perspective right, then automatically the victims should be protected and taken care of and dealt with in the right way. The accused, if you're accused in the wrong way, etc., and we've carried out many cases where we've turned around and said, sorry, it doesn't hold water, right? So trust in the system and be open. But if you have carried out the abuse, don't try to minimize it. Don't try to deflect it. Be open. In rare cases, very rare cases, we've had devotees come forward and say, I'm so sorry. I've done X, Y. What can I do to kind of make reparation? Not just for the victim, but for myself also. Can you help me? And we've had that in very rare cases.
Yeah, very rare.
Very rare. But, please be aware of that. So that is a brief thought.
And I would say, as my final thought, if you think someone else is going to do something about the Vrindavan Gurukul, they're not. Please feel free to make it your mission to investigate that and find out what on earth is going on there and why no one can get in. It's really disturbing.
Because when that call is there, when that question is put up, and if we turn a blind ear to it, then we're also implicated within that, surely.
Thank you both so much, both for turning up today and speaking candidly as you have. There may well be an appetite to hear from you more and more. And I think if you're thinking of doing an unredacted podcast, Gandharvika, I'm sure there'll be quite a few people who would tune in. But look, not just thank you for today. Thank you for the heroic work you've done for many years. I know it can possibly feel like a thankless task. I'm sure you get gratitude from those you help, and there is a lot of gratitude, I think, from the general community. We're all pained to see how you've been treated by the society's leadership, and that they are moving in such a regressive direction. But thank you for doing such a wonderful shift and for being who you are.
Thank you. We've made many mistakes, but we have tried.
We've tried.
Go ahead, Kamalesh.
Yeah, the biggest thing, or my thoughts always are, that if we were able to serve the Vaishnavas even a little bit, then whatever we've gone through, or certainly what I've gone
Mm.
through, and my wife especially, then it's worth it.
Mm.
You know, it was done for service. You know, it wasn't that we'd get up in the morning and think, wow, you know, we're going to do X, Y, and Z against A, B, and C. It's kind of, we didn't take much joy in,
Yeah.
you know, the decisions.
Well, it's often pointed out that Bhagavad Gita took place on a battlefield, but I think one of the most disconcerting things is when the injuries you sustain on the battlefield come from friendly fire, people that you imagine are on your team. So look, thank you so much. Thank you everyone who's watched and tuned in, and please do share it. Hopefully other people may benefit from watching this. We hope ISKCON leaders watch this. Hare Krishna.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna,
Thank you.
Jai Shri Prabhupada.
Thank you.